Well, hey, welcome to the Global Church Forum. I get a chance to talk with, I would probably say, the great Bob Dull every single year when we come together. And Bob, we're going to talk about economic trends today, but more so a lot of times is what's coming down the pipeline. What are you seeing as we wrap up at the year? But more so for those who are watching it, how do you think it'll affect us as ministries? How does it affect maybe the global church, giving, all of that? But with that said, thank you always for coming on here, Bob.
Of course. I'll take the Bob Dahl part, the great, let's leave to somebody else. But thanks for the kind words. The three or four questions just asked, we could spend an hour on each one. So let me just start with an overview, and then you come at me, Tommy, to break it down into other pieces. So let me start with the plain vanilla economy and markets. And let me start with the U.S. The U.S. economy is doing very well. There's no question it is slowing from the blistering pace of the first half of this year, but it is still growing nicely above trend. And for markets, that's mixed. Markets like acceleration, not deceleration. So if they decelerate from 100 to 80, you and I are going to think 80, that sounds great. But the markets will say, yeah, but yesterday it was 100. You get my point. So we're having a deceleration. That's point one. Point two, inflation. Inflation is a problem in the United States and increasingly in many parts of the world. The Central Bank of the United States, the Fed, has tried to convince themselves and the bond market that inflation is transitory, that it will pass. And I won't get technical on you, but part of it is, but much of it's not. We've had an era in the United States of 0 to 2% inflation that's been around for years. It is over, in my opinion. I think we're entering a period of 2 to 4% inflation. That's still not high inflation, but for many people, and certainly for the financial markets, there's a big difference between 0 to 2 and 2 to 4. Along with the tailwind of good economic and earnings growth, we have a phenomenon in the markets called TINA. There is no alternative, TINA. That is to say, cash is returning nearly zero. If inflation's a problem, that means interest rates will go up, which means bonds will go down. So if cash is unattractive and bonds are unattractive in the public markets, where else am I going to put my money? Stocks are the only alternative. Other flies in the ointment, along with the slowing, the deceleration, and inflation, we have fiscal policy, which is absolutely chaotic. I can make the case that nothing's going to happen with the Biden economic agenda, and I can make a case that the $3.5 trillion that he's proposed to be shrunk back to 2 is only going to be shrunk back because it's a shorter time frame. It's going to be the same programs, and over a decade, we will spend $5 trillion and anything in between. Markets hate uncertainty, and the politics of it all are mind-boggling. Outside the U.S., Tommy, things are a bit more mixed. Most places, they're improving. I haven't mentioned COVID yet, but the COVID downturn, the Delta variant downturn here in the U.S., in most parts, is pronounced and likely to unleash some more economic growth. And that's true for many parts of the rest of the world. I mean, there are differences, of course, between the UK and China and the emerging markets in Japan, but on broad brush strokes, COVID's becoming less of a negative, which enables economic growth to improve outside the U.S. in most places. Central banks around the world, led by the U.S. Central Bank, the Fed, have been incredibly generous, incredibly stimulative, and that's a tailwind for economic growth. And fiscal policy, government policy programs, spending and taxation, largely around the world, stimulative as well. So much of the rest of the world has some catch-up growth, Tommy, in order to kind of improve from where they were and do some catch up to the U.S. The U.S. got ahead of it because our Fed was so aggressive. They get high marks from those early days, which means for financial market participants, the baton is slowly being passed from the U.S. to the rest of the world. That's going to be a slow process, will take some time, but I think investors, U.S. investors who have been fortunate enough to ignore the rest of the world for the last decade should stand up, take a bow, and make some changes. Have a little of your money outside the U.S. Probably makes some sense. Let me stop there and let you probe on that or broaden the question.
Yeah. Hey, you know, I think a lot of times last year we talked about it. There was the PPP loan. There was high unemployment. As you look back, did all of that stir up the economy? Did that help?
Yeah. So it helped, no question about it. And the early days of the downturn, when it looked like the world might head into a depression, and certain industries did head into a depression, hotels, restaurants, that sort of thing, airlines. Stimulus was needed. We did not know enough about COVID, the science around it, to really understand. So it was kind of damn the torpedoes, or if you're in the car with your foot on the accelerator, floor it and leave it floored. And so the early days, the monetary and fiscal stimulus was necessary. At some point, that spending, in my view, the jury will be out and we'll know as time goes by, it became wasteful spending.
Got it.
Yeah, we, as an example, everybody's heard the story. People have been incentivized to sit in their living room, watch TV, and not go to work.
Yep.
That's not good. I mean, God made us in His image, and God is a worker, and we are to work too. So I'll get off my soapbox, but working to produce an income to aid productivity and GDP is much more beneficial than transfer payments so people can put food on the table. So it was, to summarize, excellent at the beginning, but boy, we've gone way too far.
Yeah. And for those, and we're not even talking about politics, but more so the economic agendas under the former President Trump administration, now Biden, has that helped the economy? Has their economic policies been so vastly different, or have you not noticed very much of a difference?
Yeah, so I would argue, if people remember, there were 5 big stimulus packages under President Trump.
Correct.
The first 4, and this is a judgment call, so I'd be the first to say I don't have a monopoly on right answers. The first 4 were generally okay. The components I could argue with, but the amount of money we spent. The 5th one, to me, was the first one that was a bit unnecessary or unhelpful or structured in the wrong way. And then Biden gets elected, and there's another nearly $2 trillion plan spending bill passed. I think, like the last Trump one, the first Biden one was, not good in where it went and how much it was. Now we have on the table, as you know, 2 pieces of potential legislation. One, the $1+ trillion infrastructure package. Infrastructure in the U.S. needs help, and roads, bridges, tunnels, that sort of thing, ports. That bill is not a perfect bill. There's a lot of waste in the bill, in my opinion, but there's enough substance that if I were in Congress, I would hold my nose and vote for it.
Yeah.
The one that's on the table now, the $3.5 trillion that might get whittled down to only, I can't believe I can say only, with $2 trillion right behind it, to me is mostly waste. It is, I'm going to be political for a second, it is installing socialism to the United States. It's like kind of cradle to grave, Uncle Sam will take care of you. And I'm not sure that's what our founding fathers had in mind, and I don't think it's the right recipe or the best recipe for the U.S.
Got it. If, like, for instance, the rest of the world as well too, is it primarily from your personal opinion and all that stuff, what needs to stir up the economy? A lot of times we look at Indonesia, all of those different things. Is it as the U.S. does well, they get better, or do they just need to get out of COVID and start their own businesses?
Yes, and yes, and yes. I mean, all of the above. What would be most helpful is if we'd forget how to spell COVID. It would disappear. God would just say, poof, I've penalized the world enough. Let it go.
Yeah.
Blow it away. That would instill lots of confidence and spending. There's a lot of latent purchasing power in the hands of consumers in most places, again, led by the US. And the fear factor, while not as pervasive as it was in the spring of 2020, is still there. We all know some people who are a little cautious about what it is they do. Some people a lot cautious. So if that would go away, that's the biggest impetus to global growth that I can point my finger to. Because, to repeat, underneath the surface, the monetary and fiscal stimulus has been there in a big enough way, Tommy, that if the people have money to spend, and that would be good news. And that would then promote exactly the second part of what you said. People starting up their own businesses, cranking up the business they had that they shut down because of COVID, et cetera, et cetera.
Do you find that a lot of companies or a lot of even countries are still hesitant because they don't know what variant will come out? There's the South Africa variant, there's the Delta variant. Are they hesitant thinking another variant will sweep the world?
There are, and I'm not a scientist, but the little bit of studying I've done, there are already 12 variants floating around the world.
Really? Okay,
and there may be more than that by now. Delta is the one we've heard about most in this country. There are other ones that are big elsewhere. My view, again, I'm not a scientist, is that we're going to live with COVID for years to come.
Got it.
It's going to be in waves. And because we know more about it, and we have prophylactics, we have vaccines, we have things that can significantly reduce incidence of these variants, we have a better chance to move forward. We know a whole lot more about it. We know the age cohorts that get hit. We know the symptomatic comorbidity issues that people have to deal with. So we know, not that it's safe anywhere, but we know where it's relatively safe and where it's not. And we just have to be less political and more intelligent, in my view, in how we apply that, Tommy.
Yeah. As we wrap up the year and head into next year, I know you usually come up with your 10 economic trends. You probably haven't looked at it. Are there guesses of where this economy will go this time next year, or even as we look into 2022?
Yeah, I'm only smiling because, I always have the second week in December blocked out. No calls, no meetings, no nothing. I gather with papers I've accumulated and sit down and say, what am I going to say that I can live with for the next 12 months? So the point is, I've given it zero thought so far. But I think it's safe to say that the variables are COVID, to say it one more time, inflation. If inflation's a problem, central banks around the world will have to tighten faster than people thought. To pause for a quick digression, but it's an important one. The Fed, the Central Bank of the United States, is the economy and the market's best friend until it becomes its worst enemy. It happens every cycle. In other words, when the pedal's to the metal and the Fed's flooding the system, economic growth takes off because interest rates go to zero in this case. People spend money. Money is easy to find. Money is cheap to borrow. And so the animal spirits just get going. But at some point, the Fed says, there's a party going on and it's getting a little out of hand. And as we famously say, they take the punch bowl away, which really means they begin first to reduce the rate of growth of money supply. Then they taper their purchase of fixed income instruments. And then they raise interest rates. And by the time that's all done, which is, 2 or 3 years from now, they become the economy and market's worst enemy. So that has a huge impact on where we're going. That's why I say inflation is so key.
Yeah.
Politics and geopolitics, that's another variable. Will the politics get out of the way enough? And I'm talking both sides of the aisle, so that the economic growth can pursue a course it's going to under the stimulus that we've seen, or are we going to let things get in the way, man-made or otherwise? So there are a lot of issues that have to be sorted through. Let me say it yet another way. Times are always uncertain, but they're more uncertain than usual. Guys like me, we look at the playbook. What happened last time this, and this happened? There is no last time.
Yeah.
We're in uncharted territory. So it's much more difficult to have a crystal ball with any clarity.
Yeah. Now, Bob, you know me. I like asking you this one question because stocks I actually don't do. I like crypto. Is crypto becoming more and more of a serious player? I know China always says, I don't want to deal with crypto. U.S. saying, well, we'll accept crypto. Is your stance changing? Is that something you got to take more seriously, more and more?
Oh, yeah. So here's what I'd say, and maybe the same thing I said last time you asked, whenever that was. Cryptocurrency is a legitimate, I'll use the word technology. Things will develop in those markets without question. But we still don't know who the winners and losers are going to be. We still don't know what the regulatory environment's going to be. I'm not Jamie Dimon, who's CEO of JP Morgan, who recently said, it's all worth zero. I don't believe that. But also, if you gave me money and said, Bob, invest in cryptocurrency, I'd give you your money back. I only invest in things that I think I can get a handle understanding, where I know more than I have uncertainties about. And cryptocurrency, I'm not there yet. Too many uncertainties. So to me, it's still a speculative investment. Speculative investment doesn't mean you shouldn't go there. It just means you're speculating. And you can have huge gains and huge losses within the same week.
Got it. Okay, so let's turn the corner a little bit and ask you a series of different questions. Donors, donations, charitable giving. It was a good year for a lot of organizations. We thought people would struggle, but with the PPP and everything like that and increase in charitable giving, it seemed like a lot of ministries or nonprofit did pretty well in 2020 here. Bob, would you agree?
No question about it. Now, we have to pause. I'll stick with the U.S. since I know most about contributions in the United States. There is a segment, particularly poor churches, that are struggling. We're struggling before, struggling even more, and many of them sadly have shut their doors.
Yeah.
But that is not the norm. The norm is just what you said. I think, starting with the onset of COVID, Christians and other generous people, first of all, didn't have the ability to spend money on things they might normally spend it on.
Yes.
Two, got a little bit more perspective about life and the quietness forced upon them with COVID. And I know a lot of people who said, I think other people are needier than I am. I better give a little bit more money away. So you had this surge in giving that has carried into 2021 in significant ways. So it's been a wonderful thing to witness the generosity of Americans, which relative to the rest of the world is pretty high, go even higher. Now, sadly, America only gives about 2.5% of their income.
Yeah.
I say sadly because the Old Testament standard was 10%. That should be the minimum, and many people should do a double tithe or give half their money away, half their income away, as it were. So the trends are encouraging. As the economy opens up, Tommy, and people are able to spend their money again, I wonder if people will stay with the extra generosity that they've had in the last year and a half, or will they say, you know what, it's my turn. I'm going to take care of me. And, instead of doing 2 vacations, they do 4 and they don't have any money to give away. I don't know, but it'll be very interesting to watch.
And I found even in the real estate market, people were selling their homes, getting a lot more than their fair share of market value. So they now want to give a lump sum away to really offset some of the taxes. And so suddenly there was money to spend.
Yes. Which is a good thing. And that's part of, I say to some charities, the largesse of the US government, monetary and fiscal, has helped you because that has created money, and money's got to go somewhere. And there's some reasonably wealthy or not so wealthy Americans who are saying, I'm going to give it away and enjoy the fruits of these days.
Yeah. But at the same time, Bob, you've been on many boards. A lot of times my warning for more organizations, don't expect that it will always continue this way. That means don't start hiring all these people and start growing because you may not be able to sustain it.
Exactly right. And thankfully, it's the ones I'm associated with. Not too many people have gone crazy and said, let's live above our old means because we have a new means because they don't know if it's going to stay. And you mentioned your question, I didn't comment. Yes, PPP and other programs from the government have put a lot of money in a lot of charities' pockets.
Yeah. Now, it's saying also, Bob, a lot of times you and I have been associated with a lot of schools and seminaries. Are you finding that, like, I find that a lot of schools are really struggling at times financially. Have schools, in your experience, had to reshuffle, rethink their way they do education in your experience?
No question. I would say one of the, it's hard to always generalize, but one of the generalizations I would make is within the positive contributions that you and I have just been talking about, above and beyond expected, most schools, most Christian schools are exceptions to that and still struggling. Whether it be a liberal arts Christian college, a seminary, they're still struggling. And of course, the means of delivery of their product, i.e. education, has moved from bricks and mortar to, like you and I are doing right now, virtual in lots of ways. And some are equipped to make that switch, and some are still really struggling.
Yeah. And wouldn't you say a lot of times churches now have the capacity to create their own content? Now, from that point on, you see Netflix, Tesla saying people, you don't need a 4-year education. Come and work for us. And now you're asking the same thing with MDiv students. Is the MDiv, which usually is about $50,000 for a degree, is it worth it, or can you find it somewhere else? It's changing a lot of the things that we were used to in terms of education.
No question. Again, all I have any details on, and it's scant at that, is the U.S. But the percentage of graduating high school seniors going to college in the U.S. is dropping.
Yeah.
We all know, if you're at all associated with seminaries, they're struggling to get butts and seats. It's really, really hard. And the growth of online. I mean, some of what we do, as you know, and you participate as well, is trying to educate pastors outside the U.S., particularly in the third world, where that pastor may be a Christian, a year and a half longer than the people in his church. And so, he or she needs a lot of help and a lot of training. And if you can get some good quality material there and technology permits it, they don't need an MDiv.
Yep. For instance, a lot of times, like, Bob is a lay leader with a lot of knowledge of the Bible. And so a lot of times, even one of the groups that I work with and serve with is the Growth Center. Suddenly, within a year, we've started offices and classes in Vietnam, in Hong Kong, South Africa, Kenya, rural Indonesia, all of that. Working with people like you, counselors, lay leaders from different churches, to come alongside and teach basic courses on grief counseling, how to study the Bible, the differences between gospels and epistles, all of that. Everyone's volunteering their time. Donors are able to come alongside and give $1,000 here, $1,000 there. For about $12,000, you could launch operations in a rural area in such a cheap, cost-effective way. It's changing the conversation.
Absolutely. And one of the organizations I'm involved with even provides financial assistance toward that small $12,000.
Yes.
It's incredible. So it's the barriers around the world to getting a good theological education have come down significantly in the last 24 months.
Yeah. Now, as a donor, then, is the conversations looking different as you talk with other like-minded donors, Bob? Like, for instance, before it was sending out missionaries, giving a grant here. Is it more like, hey, we're going to start a Christian business. We're going to equip entrepreneurs. Hey, would you be able to invest in our business? Is those conversations changing from the traditional way of giving, especially as you engage with leaders from around the world?
Without question. And many of these trends, as you know, Tommy, were in place prior to COVID.
Yeah.
But COVID has accelerated them in a significant way. Take the one you mentioned up front, missionaries. You know, Leslie and I had already moved our giving significantly away from sending an American where they first have to be called, then they have to join a missions agency, they have to figure out where they're going, they have to learn the language, they have to raise support, and by the time they get there, they kind of forget day one. We'd rather come alongside an indigenous Christian who can relate to the people who look just like him or her.
Yeah.
It's more efficient, and it's, in our view, more effective. Not
Got
to
it.
say the other model is dead. It's not. God will use that other model in significant ways.
Got it. I know we have 1 minute left, and that's the one thing I want to emphasize, Bob. What you and I are saying is, don't get rid of the missionaries. That's not what we're saying. Is there a cost-effective way? There's some places that will need a global missionary. So, but you got to pick and choose. But the old way of paying $120,000 for a missionary with their 3 kids to go over to Indonesia, when you got hire indigenous people who studied at Stanford and now have gone back, it looks different.
Correct. And so, still a bunch of Americans going, but not necessarily through that 6, 8, 10 years of calling and prep, instead going to practice their trade.
Yeah.
And being God's man or woman as a witness in that foreign country.
You are Mr. Busy Man. Last words as you wrap up. What is your encouragement? Here we are. What can the global church help declining numbers of the church? Back in the 70s, 80s, it was 75%. 80s, 90s, it was about 50%. That number of people in the American church has dropped down to 35%. What's your encouragement for the local church?
Oh, my answer to the last question is always buy low and sell high. You know that, Tom. No. In all seriousness, look, the youth of our country, the young people in our country, are the head of that statistic in terms of walking away from the church. And we have to go back to making it relevant. It starts with pastors and lay people to recognize that the ministry of their church is not inside their 4 walls.
Yeah.
It's out there. And if we equip people not to do church, but to do life, I think we have a much better chance. Be real where God has sent you. Be authentic. Be God's man or woman. You don't have to have the flowery language. You have to have the heart and the desire to be able to say the word Jesus in lots of different ways.
Yeah. Bob Dahl, you got to run. Thank you, my dear friend, and we'll talk soon.
Adios.